Good morning. I'm Will Sager with the Southeastern Recycling Development Council. I'd like to welcome you to our fifth of our five in our webinar series this summer. We are wrapping up today with looking at where we are with tires and what we've seen for adaptations coming out of COVID and what we can expect in our tire management in the future. I want to let you know all attendees have been muted during this presentation. If you would like to submit questions, and we encourage you to do so, please use the question box that's in the control panel that resides beside the screen window that you see. And we will get these questions to our panelists. We'll have a short question period for each individual panelist after their introductions, and then we'll have a full panel discussion following the four presentations. This webinar will be recorded, and we will have it on our website by Friday. The link is there, and you will be able to navigate to it from our home page as well. If you have any trouble with the audio in your email or your calendar invite to this, there is a call-in number and code where you can call into here. And a reminder to our speakers, that's available to you as well, should there be some type of audio issue. I'd like to extend a word of appreciation to our annual sponsors. All the work that SERDC does to advance recycling in the region is made possible by these sponsors, and we do thank them for that. Our mission is fully stated there, but we're working to bring together government and industry and the others entities involved in the value chain to develop recycling, to get more material into manufacturing, and to make sure that those decision makers that make it happen are aware of the economic impact and the opportunities that are available. And we've done some work in the area of messaging to the participants as well. We do seek to have more of the waste stream captured and feeding the manufacturing base in the Southeast. We've documented that manufacturing base, and it's very strong. We have strong markets here for many of our materials. We have other webinars that talk about markets and prices as they're going up and down, but that's not today's webinar. Our webinar series this summer has been sponsored by ISRI and MachineX. They've made that where we did not charge admission to these webinars, and we have a brief word from each of them that we'll share with you.
Hello, I'm Robin Weiner, the president of ISRI. ISRI is very proud to partner with SERDC and others participating in this webinar series to showcase how the recycling industry has adapted to meet numerous unexpected global challenges while continuing to provide essential infrastructure and products needed in our everyday lives. ISRI looks forward to working with each of you to continue advancing the recycling industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Today's four speakers, we have Jana White from South Carolina Department of Environment for Health Environment Conservation, Bruce Bart from Eco Green, Lena Chambliss from Georgia EPD, and Amy Bracken from Liberty Tire Recycling. Their full bios are on our website where you registered for this conference, and I'm not going to take time away from them to their presentations to read those to you. That is available. I encourage you to do that. I extend my appreciation to our speakers for the time they've put together to prepare these presentations and to be here with us today. And with that, I will give it to Jana to give us South Carolina's perspective.
Thank you, Will. I appreciate that. And thank you, SERDC, for inviting me to speak. And thank you, Jen, for getting my slides up. Yeah, so we here in South Carolina have a number of concerns about tires. We are pretty heavily involved with our local governments and with our processors. And so we think it's really important to keep our eye on the prize, which is to make sure these tires are getting to where they're supposed to be. And so our concern is with how much that's costing, where the tires are going, whether or not we have the infrastructure we need to get these tires recycled rather than disposed, because we do think that's also important. And that involves having good, strong markets that are going to keep our processors healthy and profitable, which helps make everybody else's costs lower. So those are the main things I wanted to talk about from our perspective as a state government and why we even are involved in all of that. In South Carolina, we have a $2 tire fee when you buy a tire. The tire money goes to the state of South Carolina, except that there is a portion that the retailers can keep if they send their tires off to be recycled. So right off the bat, we have this program where we develop a list of what we call approved recyclers, and if retailers send their tires to those recyclers, they get to keep $1.06 of that money, which hopefully right off the top make sure those tires go where they're supposed to be. The rest of the money then is split between the counties and DHEC. The state uses the funding to oversee the permitting of processors and the hauler registration program, which we have a manifest system and a hauler registration that requires bonding. We have a ban on whole tires. You can put chipped up tires in a landfill, but you cannot put whole tires in a landfill. And so we have inspectors that enforce those that ban. The most important thing I think we probably do is our stockpile abatement program, which used to be the most important part of our program. As we've matured as a program, we're moving more toward preventing stockpiles, which is getting those tires into the hands of the county where they can be managed properly, and we give funding to the local governments to help them manage those tires. We also do education outreach, again, to try to prevent open dumping of waste tires. Since our program started, we've removed about 9 million tires from stockpiles at a cost of about $14 million. And if you'll go to the next slide, some of that has been from processors that have gone out of business. So we understand the importance of keeping processors healthy. We understand the importance of markets for tires. And so this is an ongoing concern of how to keep those tires moving so they don't wind up like this facility. In state at the moment, we have a cement company that burns whole tires. We have a number of cement companies that burn chip tires, but once the tires have been made into an approved TDF, tire-derived fuel, we do not require a solid waste permit to burn those tires. The air quality department has separate permits, but we do not permit them as a solid waste group. We do permit Argo cement because they are burning the whole tires. We have a Ridge Recyclers facility, which is a Liberty tire processor, one of those in South Carolina, and we have South Carolina tire processors, which chips tire-derived fuel for the use by the Savannah Riverside outside of Bacon. Besides those facilities, we have 10 rebate facilities, which are facilities outside of the state, which we have deemed eligible for the rebate to the retailer should the retailer send their tires to that entity. The county uses their portion of the money to again, remove tires from stockpiles if necessary, to do public education, and also to do what we call current generation tire management, which again is to try to get the tires out of the hands of the public, out of the hands of the used tire dealers, into the county's facilities so that those tires we know will be managed properly. So the county gets money directly for those activities. If they don't have enough money, they can apply to us for grants. We give them grants to help them offset their costs for managing those tires. In the past, we have also had funding we could use for market development. We paid for things like walking trails and running tracks and other uses of crumb rubber, some paving type rubberized paving. That money, because of the costs going up and the number of tires going up, which is I'm going to talk about in a second, we haven't had enough funding in a number of years to do our market development grants, which is disappointing. The good news, I guess, is that the money coming into DHEC and to the counties and presumably as well to the retailers, it has gone up about 57% since 2014. This is tire sales are up, and I'm sure we can talk about that more, but that's the good news. And if we go to the next slide, the bad news is that the counties are having to manage 86% more tires than they managed in 2014. This is partly because of the obviously escalating size of tires. So tires are getting bigger. So the number of tires, we do it by tons. So there's more, even for the same number of tires, your weight's going to go up. But mostly this is because as the costs have increased for getting rid of these tires, more and more retailers and other people who have tires who might have managed them on their own are choosing instead to take them to the county for the county to manage. And so we are seeing the counties, because in South Carolina, the counties are required to set up these collection sites. We are seeing the counties getting more and more tires in at their collection sites. And then to add to that, we are also seeing the cost per ton for managing those tires going up. So we are seeing since 2017 a 25% increase in what the counties are paying to get rid of their tires. And that 25% increase doesn't include these additional costs that are now being charged either by the processors or if there's an intermediate hauler being charged by the intermediate hauler, fuel surcharges, freight charges, environmental fees. We're seeing a lot more added costs over and above that per ton cost. Prior, I stuck this, the reason this slide does not go back to 2014 like the others do, we did have, in fact, the processor that went out of business, that Viva Recycling, whose picture I just showed you a little bit ago, who had artificially lowered prices. You know, so I think we have to acknowledge that prior to 2017, we did have some lower prices that was kind of an artificial market. But since 2017, when those people were out of the marketplace, we have still seen a 25% increase in the per ton cost. So the other thing we look at in South Carolina is where are the tires going? We're always really interested in knowing where they are going and what's happening to them. And we work with our Department of Commerce and do a survey, not every year, but periodically, to survey the processors in state and also the processors out of state that accept a number of South Carolina tires. And so we've tried to sort of get a handle on where those tires go. Early in the South Carolina program, a lot of those tires were going to septic, like septic tank installations in place of aggregate, and that was a huge use. I think we were the first state to approve that specification, and a lot of our tires early on were going there. If we go to the next slide, that has dropped off dramatically. It's continued to drop off. So in 2006, we were starting to see TDF as a major use of where our tires were going, and we started to see crumb rubber popping up as another use. And I want to say on these surveys, we recognize that crumb as one giant monolithic division of where tires go, it doesn't make a lot of sense. We're intending to break that up and kind of dive a little bit deeper into when we say crumb, where is it going? Is it going into landscaping? Is it going into tracks? You know, where's it going? So that category is a little fuzzy. Then so moving to 2010, we were seeing fuel as a huge part of the market, civil engineering shrinking down to almost nothing. And part of, apparently septic tanks are now installed with very differently, and they don't even use aggregate at all. So that market has shrunk considerably. And by 2010, we were seeing fuel the majority of what was being done. And if we could go to the next slide. So by 2018, we're now seeing fuel shrink again, and chrome rubber, sports, and landscaping use growing. You know, the fuel market, we have some concerns about where that's going. You know, we know natural gas is competition. The fuel market is always going to be about what's cheap or what's going to give me the better emissions. So, you know, going forward, we know that the fuel basket, while it's still certainly a part of the portfolio, it's not really necessarily where we think the future is going. So what else are we worried about? So we have a number of concerns about the new tires that are coming out. And if any of you were at the national conference at the end of 2019 that the US Tire Council put on, we know tire design, they've got these wheels that look nothing like a regular tire, that have poly resin spokes that don't get recycled like a normal tire. We have self-sealing tires that gum up tire processing equipment. We have tires with Kevlar built into them, which again is a little tough on equipment. So we do have concerns about whether or not the industry is going to be able to keep up with these changes. You know, we want tires to be good and we want them to last a long time, so these are all good innovations, but it does make it certainly harder on the tire processing industry. And again, like I mentioned, we certainly have concerns about where TDF use is going. On the other hand, we are happy that, you know, I think we do see, if we could go back one more slide, thanks. You know, we do think that there are certainly emerging technologies that are going to make tire recycling maybe take us in a new direction, with whether it's pyrolysis or gasification, or, you know, that eventually these technologies will be viable and profitable, and maybe we're not quite there yet, but we think that's coming. We are also thinking that there's a lot of maybe stormwater management and some other sustainability issues that are going to be making use of tire-derived aggregate that we think could be a good future use. We're still encouraged about rubberized pavements, and that's going to be something coming up, and permeable pavements, which is another sustainability practice. Mechanical concrete is something kind of new, and we're also encouraged by the fact that the industry is becoming, I think, more and more professional and recognizing that they need ASTM standards or they need DOT specifications, something that's going to make their product about competing in the marketplace with these other materials. It is not just about getting rid of tires. We need these to be competitive across the board with other virgin materials. In South Carolina, there's been a little bit of DOT activity. We're a little behind where I wish we were, but they do have a specification for some hot mix performance graded binders that they've used in a couple test projects. We're seeing a little more activity more recently in a dry process alternative that they have done in some other states, and they have done a trial here in South Carolina on I-20. Where they put down, it was an open graded friction course in the passing lane that they did a test in the travel lane with conventional PG 7622 asphalt binder. The big problem with our pavers is the cost of the equipment they would need to use these new technologies in paving. They're not familiar with doing it. Material handling is a little more difficult. And there's also a lot of other, you know, rubber is a good modifier to asphalt. It brings a lot of properties that you want, longevity being one of them, certainly one of the most important ones. But there's other modifiers too that compete with the tire rubber. Tire rubber isn't the only modifier that the pavers can use, and so that's you know, just a competition issue. We have formed in South Carolina a scrap tire sustainability coalition. They have not been very active recently. We've had some other issues that we've had to put on the front burner. Solar panels and electronics recycling has been taking up a lot of our time. But we know tire recycling and the sustainability of tires is a huge issue, and it's going to continue to be a big issue. And so we do still have this coalition of people that we work with and will continue to work with to try to address some of these issues. You know, everything from the dumping and the public education to the strong markets and processor health and keeping good processors in business at a reasonable and sustainable cost for everyone. And I think I'm taking my questions at the end, so that's, I think, all I have for now. Will, I think there's something in the chat. Would you like me to address it now?
I had to find my mute button. I'm sorry, please. Yes, you do have one question that came in as a question of whether this is focused just on cars and trucks, or are bicycle and motorcycle tires included?
In South Carolina, it would include the motorcycle tires, but not the bicycle tires. So there's no ban on bicycle tires going into the landfill, and whether a recycler accepted them would just be a matter of preference and what their handling and equipment situation was.
Thank you, Jana.
Thank you.
I do encourage all of the participants to put any questions or open any comments that you may have into the question box. Our next speaker, Lena Chambliss from Georgia EDP. Welcome, Lena. We're glad to have you with us.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me, SERDC. And today I will be speaking a bit about Georgia's Solid Waste Trust Fund and some recent changes to the Act, and also a little bit about how we have been allocating our appropriated fees for scrap tire management in Georgia. So a little bit of background about the Solid Waste Trust Fund. It was established in 1990 as part of the Georgia Comprehensive Solid Waste Management Act. And then in 1992, the Act established our primary source of funding as a $1 fee on every new tire sold in the state. And that tire fee has various, it's collected and by our tire management unit, which is one of the 5 units within our solid waste program. And it has very specific authorized uses that we're allowed to use that for. And some of those are listed here for any kind of emergency action, preventative or corrective actions, to monitor and provide post-closure, and for the proper closure of abandoned landfills. Now, these first ones listed here are really like an emergency type situation, and the primary focus has really been in scrap tire management, in the cleanup and regulation, program management, and also grants to our local governments. And so today we're going to talk about the tire management portion of that. And then also I'm going to go over a brief description of the recent changes that we've had to the Act, which is what I'm going to start with. So the dedication of fees has been a topic that we have been discussing for the last I'd say 2.5 years. This all began with an audit back from 2015 that showed the vast discrepancy in the fees that were collected and how the appropriated fees were not really being used for the intended trust funds. And so this isn't just for the Solid Waste Trust Fund. The legislature was also taking a look at all of the trust funds in the state. So the way the Act was written, they were allowed to pull out of these trust funds and use them for other state budget needs. And thankfully that got us out of the budget shortfalls of the 2009-2010 era, but it never went back to the intended purposes. So one of our legislators proposed a bill back in 2019 to try to shore up what was collected and what was actually allocated out and appropriated to the various trust funds. So there was a lot of back and forth over these last couple years, and the end result was that they decided to send it out to the November 2020 ballot. And last fall, amendment number 1 was added to the ballot and took it to the citizens to ask if they wanted to use all of these fees for their actual intended purposes and dedicate that tax and fee revenue. So it did pass with 82.61% of the vote, and then moved into House Bill 511, and the legislature did uphold the vote. This also extended the sunset of the trust fund, where typically we'd have to renew this every couple of years. Now it's going to be much longer, and we will start to see this dedication of fees next year, in our next fiscal year. So, oh, actually, Jen, I'm sorry, can you skip one more slide? I just realized they were out of order. No, ahead one more, I'm sorry, right there, thank you. So this chart here shows a little bit about, and also I have to say, these are our draft numbers for fiscal year 21, so they might change just a little bit, but I wanted to go ahead and share them with you now. But this chart here shows the blue line shows the tire fees that have been collected over the last 10 years in Georgia. And the red line shows what was actually appropriated to EPD. And as you can see, the green line shows our reserve balance, which thankfully has risen. We haven't had to use this for any kind of emergency response action or anything like that, or funding for other programs. So we're in a pretty good place now. It's where we have a nice reserve balance, and hopefully moving into fiscal year 22, we will be able to restore some of the things that our program had done typically in the past. So yes, so this slide here is showing how we have spent the appropriated fees that were allocated over to EPD. So most of what you see here in the dark green shows the scrap tire management and abatement projects. The blue shows just our operations and program funding. And we did have some waste reduction and litter education in the past, but as you can see, that has kind of dwindled down over the years. And abandoned landfills, these projects come at the discretion of the director. So they are listed and ranked in priorities. So this isn't something that's necessarily happening every year at the same scale. So Jen, I'm so sorry, but if you could go back to the little, the slide I missed, thank you so much. Okay, so this is a little bit of a breakdown over our fiscal year 21. And as you can see, we do have quite a bit of permitted facilities. We have a tire management unit that conducts inspections, and they also handle any kind of scrap tire complaints. They go out and identify scrap tire dumps, and they also handle the tire fee collection within that unit. And last year we collected 7.6 million. So anytime they have a tire dump, they try to seek resolution. They try to find the responsible party and speak with the property owner and try to determine if they were in fact a victim of the crime, or what had happened. Because as we all know here, folks love dumping tires in the woods if they think they can get away with it. So with this program, after the tire management unit exhausts all of their needs, that are all of their resources, trying to determine if they can find resolution on their own. If they can't, or if the property owner has found to be a victim of the crime, then they will refer that over to our unit. And then we have two different types of programs for scrap tire abatement. And one is state-led tire abatement projects, and the other is through the local government scrap tire abatement program. Okay, you can skip, Jen. Down, yep, right there, perfect. Okay, so our local governments program, any city, county, or solid waste management authority can apply for this program. And we will reimburse them for all of the costs associated with removing, transporting, and processing the scrap tires. It has to go to one of our listed beneficial reuse processors that can be in-state or out-of-state. In fact, we find that a lot of our folks on the east side end up going to SC Tire Processing that Jana mentioned. And we have 3 different types of programs that the local governments can apply for. They can have a tire amnesty day, a right-of-way project cleanup, and that allows them to clean up tires for an entire year from the date the agreement is issued, and collect tires and remove it. And also the local government can sponsor their own tire abatement project. And we don't see that as frequently because most of the tire issues we find are on private property, but the local government does have that option if they want to sponsor the tire dump cleanup. And you can all find more information about our program here. This map here shows the counties who have participated since 2016. And we've removed 875,000 PTE, and we've reimbursed local governments up to $1.9 million. And some of our local governments participate every year. Some have 2 a year. And we have seen that those local governments who have more frequent events, we find less tire dumps in the area and just less right-of-way tires in general, because it seems that folks know that they can take their tires to an event twice a year. So they know they have an outlet to get rid of them. So then our next option that we have, as I mentioned before, are the state-led abatement projects. So after the tire management has responded and tried to seek their resolution, it gets referred over to our unit. And at this point, we compile a list of all the sites throughout the state. And we do at least 2, if not more, of these state-led abatement contracts throughout the fiscal year. We did have a bit of slowdown, of course, during COVID. We weren't sure what our financial, finance was going to look like with everything, or if the legislature would be dipping into that fund again for any kind of emergency spending. So we were asked to hold off. So at this time, we have all of our listed sites are under contract, or they're about to be under contract on the next one that's coming up. So we are actually caught up now from COVID. And if you could go to the next slide, I'll show you a little breakdown of that. Okay. So here, this site, it's just everything we've ever done with the state-led abatement projects. So the ones that are under enforcement here at the top list, these are the ones that are still being handled by the tire management unit, and they are actively seeking a resolution with these sites. The ones that are listed here as abatement will be on the next contract that we're putting out to bid within the next 2 weeks. So thankfully, we only have 8 sites right now. Those under contract, the 16, some of these are we've had for about 2 years because of COVID, and we also track a metric that is from the date the tire dump is identified to the date that it's cleaned, whether that's under enforcement or if it's under contract. And right now, we, because of COVID, we saw a bit of extended days until those sites were marked as clean. But as you can see here, we've had 656 tire dump sites cleaned up for 709,000 PTE at just around $5.5 million here. Or that was the estimated cost, sorry. The actual was about $2 million. And the sites remaining for cleanup are those under enforcement, abatement, and that are currently under contract now. So once the contractor lets us know they're done, we go out and verify they're clean, and then we change their status. So those are state projects for tire abatements. I see there's a question. Is that for me?
We're going to hold that question for
Okay.
the whole panel at the end, but thank you, Lena.
Great.
It is, the amendment one is close to my heart, and we'll talk about that some more too.
Okay, great.
But now we're going to bring up Bruce Bart, who is going to share with us some of the logistics and equipment involved and how these tires actually do move around and what it takes to run a tire program. Bruce?
Hey, thank you very much, Will. Thank you, the SERDC, for asking us to participate in this. What I'm going to talk about this morning is basically the recycling challenges and the opportunities for the Southeastern United States for the SERDC area. There are many challenges regarding tire recycling within all of the United States, both on an individual state level as well as regional level, like with the SERDC. While there are many common challenges among both states and regions, there are also many market opportunities. And as I look at our industry and where I see most of the calls coming for equipment, the SERDC region is far and away the top region that we get requests from. Regardless of the state or region that you're planning to provide tire recycling services in, there are some basic considerations that I always recommend people should take a look at and address prior to selecting the size of the operation, as well as the products which you plan to produce from the recycled tire content. So how do you decide to be or not to be a tire processor? That's the first question I always get asked. There are many factors when you're thinking of becoming a tire recycler, but the number one thing I always suggest to people is do your research before you pull the trigger on anything. Look at a few different things. First, starting with location. Do you have enough tires in your area to make it worth your while? Generally, a smaller operation is going to be about 1 million tires processed a year on the small end, and you're going to collect from within about a 200-mile radius. The competition. How many processors are already in that defined area, and how many tires do they actually process in a year, and what products are they producing? We heard earlier that, for instance, in South Carolina, at one point there was a lot of TDF being used. Then that swung to, crumb rubber. So the markets do change, and you need to do some investigation and to see what's actually being produced. Tire transportation and collection. Do you plan to collect the tires yourself, or do you want to work with existing haulers, or maybe do a combination of the both of those? What do the end products produce in your area, and at what volumes? If it's in the South, for instance, there's a lot more field turf being utilized down there because they have more warm weather, and the sports are obviously going further into the year than, say, in the North. What are the equipment requirements? And when we talk about equipment requirements, not just the tire processing equipment, but also the auxiliary equipment. The further you process the materials, the more auxiliary equipment you're going to need as well. And then finally, is there state and local government support to put in an operation? That's not always the case in most states, but in a lot of states, like most of the ones where the SERDC are, we're seeing a lot of activity at the state level to try to help processors start new facilities, or to help existing processors do a better job. So we'll start off with location. Most of us have heard that the United States generates about 1 scrap tire per person per year, and that's true. But what about the other tires that are out there? If you're going to be a processor, it's probably just not going to be car and truck tires. You're going to have people want to bring farm or ag tires to you. There's OTR and mining tires that are out there, illegally dumped tires, scrap tires from new manufacturers. In the SERDC area, there's a lot of new tire manufacturing going on, and those new manufacturers produce quite a volume of scrap tires. So you need to think about, do you plan to take any or all of those types of tires as well? What are the permitting requirements, both at the state and local level? Does the location offer easy access for trucking, so that it's easy for not just your trucks to get to your facility, but any haulers or transporters that might want to use your facility? And then the land, the building, the labor, the power, all of these are major considerations, not just from a costing standpoint, but also from availability. Tire processing plants generally take pretty high volumes and constant supply of electricity. So in some areas, the electricity isn't always readily available at the levels that you might need. And is the location favorable for product distribution? If you're going to be making, say, crumb rubber, is it a crumb rubber that's going to have to be trucked 300, 400, 500 miles? Or do you have consumers for your end product that are relatively close? And then are there any incentives available, such as state grants, local tax incentives, or other funding that would help you with your startup cost? These are all things that you should be looking at in the beginning of the project, not after you've already started it. Next is competition. I always tell people competition is not a bad thing. It means that there's a need in your area that someone is filling, or at least trying to fill, and you should investigate what they cover, what area they cover, what products they produce, and what the current market costs are. This will help you to decide things like how you're going to collect tires, what you should charge in your area, and what products you may want to produce down the road. In many areas of the U.S., tire processors will also often work together for a variety of reasons. And a couple good examples would be, what if your shredder happens to go down and you're down for a couple weeks? What do you do for your clients? So it's nice to be able to have a working relationship with another processor to be able to redirect those tires while you're repairing some equipment. Another good example might be, what if that processor has a huge order and for whatever reason doesn't have enough material? Maybe you can help to work with them. So a lot of times you'll find that the processors will work together more often than not for reasons like that. And most of the processors don't really view each other as a threat, but rather the real threat is the illegal tire dumpers, the poorly run processors, like the example that was given in South Carolina earlier, the people that are collecting tires for the revenue, but not actually processing the tires through to a finished product. And probably the biggest threat that I see, more so in the Midwest and the Northeast, more so than the SERDC is going to see, is the subsidized markets, for instance, with Canada, where the government's paying really high dollars or a lot of monies to the processors to make crumb rubber, for instance, at a price that's well below what we would be able to produce that for in the U.S. So that's the real competition. As far as tire transportation and self-collection, this is probably one of the hardest things for people to get their head around. Is when you talk about 1 million of anything, it's a lot, but 1 million tires takes a lot of transportation capability. So again, 1 million is a relatively small number, but to process 1 million tires, you would basically need 53-foot trailers. And if you get a 53-foot trailer, about 1,200 tires in it, that means you're going to process 3 tires a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year to do 1 million tires. The average trailer turn at each client is going to be about 3 weeks. Some clients will turn them in a week. Some clients might take 6 weeks, but on average 3 weeks, which means you would need a stable of about 60 trailers, which means you're going to have 45 trailers in the field and a week's worth or 15-foot or 15 trailers in your stable. You would also need at least 2 tractors to mobilize those trailers. And if you're transporting shred to a landfill for, say, alternate daily cover, or you're taking tire-derived fuel chips to a consumer, you would need at least 2 walking floor trailers and another tractor to transport that material as well. So all in, you need roughly $600,000 in trucks and trailers, and that's if you're buying used equipment. You're also going to need 4 drivers, a mechanic, and someone to handle all the DOT paperwork and state required manifest. So at the end of the day, the point is self-reliant collection is neither cheap nor easy, but it is a very good revenue source. And I don't know any tire processors that lose money on the transportation side. You should never lose money on the transportation side. If you're doing tire transportation with a hauler or a tire transporter, you'll find that most processors choose to do that as well. Often they will start out with a smaller operation, maybe 1 tractor and a dozen trailers, and they'll grow of self-transportation, and they'll grow that part of the business as they grow. But then they also work with haulers and transporters that are licensed in the state, and this will certainly make the transportation of the tires to your facility easier, but it will also take away from that transportation revenue component, as well as make your facility more reliant on those haulers. Most every state has a list of licensed transporters and haulers, which you can access through their state website. And I would advise contacting the haulers on that list as part of your research to see if they will share with you the volumes they handle and the fees they are willing to pay should you decide to open a new facility. End-use products made from tires. There are basically 4 processing methods used to produce tire-derived products. From a primary shredder, you get the 4-inch shred. Secondary shredder, 1-inch free wire nuggets. From granulators, you get crumb rubber, and from cracker mills, you get rubber powder. There are products that can be produced from every process, but the further you reduce the material in size, generally the higher the value of that material. The key, though, is to balance the capital equipment and labor cost for producing those materials with the production cost to do so. So most often new processors find that the easiest entry into tire recycling is just to keep it simple. Look for landfills that utilize alternate daily cover for TDF consumers so that you can establish collections. Once you get that collection side of it, it's easy to bring in additional equipment and start to identify new markets that you can then push material to. Look for markets that big processors don't focus on. Things like plastic rubber compounds. The crumb rubber is becoming a very big thing, at least here in the Midwest. We're seeing things like the big 3 automotive companies taking interest in it. And what they're doing is using it as a filler to make like a TPE or TPO modified material for things like mud flaps. So on the new Ford Bronco, for instance, the big Bronco that's coming out, I know the company that's working on that project that will have crumb rubber in it, as did the F-350 truck mud flap a few years ago when Ford first introduced that material in that product. So look for the smaller markets if you're a new processor, because odds are the big processors that are out there are already filling the need for asphalt, for crumb rubber in sports fields, for rubber mulch, and the things that are kind of more commonly referred to as the commodity markets within rubber recycling. Equipment requirements. There are many quality tire recycling equipment manufacturers in the U.S. The key is to find the equipment supplier that can provide the things that are most important to you and to your new facility. And the things that you want to consider when selecting an equipment manufacturer are things like quality and durability of the machinery, including the control systems, the ease of maintenance and cost of maintenance on a per ton basis, your energy utilization and your energy consumption, engineering and spare parts support, field service technician availability, cost of equipment versus production cost per ton, and the support from the manufacturer to identify value-added markets which their equipment is better suited to produce than for some specific markets. And I think this one's very important as you look to manufacturers, because it's not just about supplying you as an existing or new processor equipment. It's about making sure that that equipment's going to produce the materials that you need in the most cost-effective way. State and local government support. Early on in your research, you should be checking with your state tire recycling oversight department to see what permits are required, what grants may be available, what funding may be available, and what the timelines are for these. I get asked a lot to provide proposals for new facilities so that people can apply for grants, and they think that there's just a pool of money that's sitting there that once they turn in that proposal, they get it. They don't realize there's a timeline that those grant programs work to. So, you know, it could be as long as a year and a half from the time that you submit your application to the time the funding becomes available. If you're trying to do something very quickly, that may or may not fit into your timeline. So it's important to understand the timelines for all those things as well. And then work with the state to develop your plan. And when you have everything ready, that's when I suggest people go to their local government, engage them with the idea, because unfortunately, you know, tire recycling facilities do still have that stigma of, you know, it only takes one tire fire plant or one fire at a tire plant to cast shade on everybody. So whether it's a facility that goes down because they didn't process everything and has to then be cleaned up, or because of a fire, it's not always an easy thing to get them in at the local level. The state levels, most every state I've worked with, they're very accommodating and they'll help you. But again, you want to have everything buttoned up by the time you go to the local level. So those are just a few of the things that, that I see and from my position within the equipment world. And if you have any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bart. We do appreciate that. Now we're going to move on to Amy Bracken from Liberty Tire. Amy, thank you for being with us today.
You got it. Hey, thanks for having me. I did notice, I think my last slide had disappeared, so my contact information is going to be on the SERDC website on my bio if anyone needs it. But thanks for having me. All of the prior speakers have done an amazing job, and I know I'm kind of standing between the panel discussion and your lunch, so I'm going to try and move through this as quickly as possible. So Liberty Tire is the largest tire recycler in North America. The business, as we know it today, started in 2000, but our earliest recycling operations were back into the 50s and really started to work on beneficial end-use products in about 1985. So we've been around a long time. We currently have around 2,700 employees and 42 facilities around North America. So as you can see on the map here, we're trying to do a good job in the Southeast and do our part in the region by having a number of different facilities available in that area. We do have both full service collections business, picking up those used tires, and we also have a full scale processing business that granulates tires into beneficial end use. You know, I think one of the things that often gets missed when folks start to learn more about the tire industry and processing is, you know, one of the challenges in this business, and Bruce mentioned it, is that we have a supply chain that essentially doesn't shut off, right? So in addition to having outbound markets, it's really important to understand the dynamics of what it means to be a collection business, and the fact that each and every day you're going out and picking up tires and need to make decisions about what those tires are going to be used for, because at any level, right, we can't have a tire pile. Once we grind something into a chip, it can't be undone. So there's a lot more sophistication and complication to what seemingly is an easy business for folks when they start to look to get into that. So I do think that is one of the challenges in tire processing. And as Jana alluded to, you know, often we find people that come in and tend to change the market dynamic and unfortunately can't sustain the business model that they start with. Go ahead to the next slide. So I think everybody in this room is probably familiar with the environmental benefits, but I did want to touch on it because it's important. There's a clear impact on greenhouse gas emissions and recycling and how that does reduce our carbon footprint. I think with the focus more and more, and as we've seen even in 2020 and 2021, an increasing focus on ESG strategy and sustainability efforts, this is really, really becoming an important piece. In addition to the environmental benefits, there's also an economic driver here. So we know if I look at a 2015 study, which of course has obviously changed over the last number of years, the rubber recycling industry generates more than $1.6 billion annually in economic activity. So that's a little more than 8,000 jobs and generates about 500 million in employee wages. So it really is a fantastic business and one that can support a lot of growth. Next slide. So I'm going to use my presentation because Bruce has done such a great job talking about equipment challenges and kind of overall business challenges of what we do. I'll spend my time focused on those end markets. So what you're looking at on the screen is reference data from the 2019 scrap tire study done by the USTMA. And depending on whose data you look at on any given day, what you can find is today in the US, somewhere between 70 and 80% of all the scrap tires now are being recycled and reused. So as we, 20 years ago, we're talking about a major issue with tire piles. We really don't see that as much anymore, and that's kind of become a thing of the past with a few obvious exceptions. But it's important to note here that while this looks like our level of recycling is decreasing, it really is the effect of the number of new tires coming into the market and the fact that we haven't necessarily been able to keep up with the growth on the market development side. So I did want to kind of mention that, and that's what's making these market development efforts just so much more important as we go forward. So if we look at the market since 2011, just go back 1 second. We can see that overall things have been fairly flat and relatively unchanged. The business has been around a long time. The one thing that we see here is we clearly do need more innovation to really make a big leap and grow this market by significant numbers. Go ahead, Jen. So as Jana had talked about, I'm going to spend my time focused on this ground rubber market. You know, one of the challenges industry-wide has been this shift away from tire-derived fuels. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, right? We're talking about emissions, we're talking about natural gas, but the reality is that 40% of the overall market is currently going into tire-derived fuels. So as we see some of those shifts in the market and changes in tire-derived fuel, it really is going to take a lot in these other areas to pick up the volume that we may lose when somebody goes out of that TDF market. And we've seen some of that in the Southeast, right? So the ground rubber market, while not the largest in volume, I think offers the highest value opportunities for someone looking at scrap tires. And that's what we'll talk a little bit more about now. You can go to the next slide. So one big area within ground rubber is sports surfacing and playgrounds. And probably the most well-known of that is crumb rubber that's used as an infill product in synthetic turf fields. So that market kind of developed about 15 years ago, and it was a premium product that supported that old short pile height NastroTurf, and that market has exploded. What happened though back in 2014, and while that's still a major outlet for rubber, it started to be challenged, right? With the media creating some uncertainty about the use of the product. And when you look at that industry, it really has become fatigued by the challenges that have been presented. There are hundreds and hundreds of studies showing the safety of synthetic turf infill, not just in the US, but globally. And still, there is an opportunity to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt in this market, and it has presented those challenges. So what we've seen is that even the synthetic turf manufacturers now are kind of tired of fighting that fight. They've developed a lot of alternatives in this market. We don't have a lot of time to get into the details of that, but there's also another element to the playing surface market, which is now that this material has been in the ground for 15 years or so, it's time for these fields to come back up out of the ground. And so the other element of what we see here is the removal of that infill, of that original tire rubber, and reclamation efforts that are either putting that product back into synthetic turf fields for a secondary life, or they're looking for outlets for that material. And it is really changing the dynamics of that playing surface market. Also in this space, we see the track market. So while many of you probably have high school tracks nearby with brightly colored top surfaces on those, beneath that surface, we are using recycled rubber, tire rubber, as a component, as the base of those tracks. And that market is growing pretty steadily. You can go to the next slide. So the next segment I'll touch on is ground rubber nuggets. And while this is generally deemed as playgrounds, it really is broader than that. And that's kind of the point I want to make here. By far, the biggest piece here is ground rubber mulch. But the other interesting markets that we see are ballistic ranges, porous pavement that I know was mentioned earlier, and bike trails and walking paths, and a small but a thriving market in equestrian arenas. I also use military training in this segment because really what that is these uncolored mulch nuggets that are used for training areas or pits where they may need to see significant fall heights and need a safety surfacing underneath. I'll caution a little bit here that the ballistics market, while it is a good market, is a very tricky one because it requires this large particle size, but it also requires a very, very clean material. So it's got to be a high quality material, no fiber, no steel, and really for obvious reasons, right? People are shooting bullets into these, it gets hot, and any type of exposed rubber or exposed wire or fiber can be a fire hazard, obviously. We are seeing more and more growth in this segment in porous paving, which is a fantastic use of recycled rubber material. It contributes to the beautification of neighborhoods. It provides accessibility benefits. It's resilient. According to a 2016 report that I found from realtor.com, a home's value can actually increase up to $34,000 when bike and pedestrian infrastructure is introduced into a community. And I think that's really an important note as we think about, you know, state grants and things like that. That's something that often gets overlooked and really could be an important growth path for recycled rubber material. Next slide. So clearly the growth trend, though, as I alluded to on the previous slide, is rubber mulch. Retail sales are over at this point 100 million. I am very pleased to share that in early 2022, Liberty Tire will be adding capacity for a mulch line in our North Carolina facility. So we will start making mulch product in that region. And we're really excited about that because we see market demand continuing to increase for years to come in this area. Look, we know that there is a public perception and education here that can grow this market even further. We know that it lasts significantly longer than its counterpart in wood mulch, but wood mulch does provide some challenges here. We've all seen it, right? You start heading into early spring and you can buy your wood mulch for $2 a bag, which is a really attractive price out of the gates compared to rubber mulch. It also is fought a little bit by the landscaping business because obviously for them, it doesn't offer them the repeat sales that wood mulch may be that gets, you know, replaced 3 or 4 times each year. So definitely a growth market, but, you know, not without its challenges, as many of us see in every market. Next slide. So the next one to look at is molded products. And this is our largest segment in rubber products and has been for decades. This is a huge growth market in the Southeastern region as well. It's easy to see why, because when you look specifically at compression molding, recycled rubber is a low-cost product by comparison to the virgin alternatives, and it performs extremely well for these uses. It's durable, and when it's bound with urethane, it's very, very stable and does well in nearly all temperatures. So from flooring to bumper weights that would go on the end of a barbell to animal bedding, all kinds of different traffic safety devices, these markets are continuing to grow. But the growth is incremental, and you know, as Bruce said earlier, we are seeing some challenges with incentives coming in that are driving pricing to levels that make it difficult for US manufacturers to compete. So we have to pay attention to that and be aware of that. But this is a very big market in the Southeast, and so is the sports field market. That North Georgia area is kind of, you know, ground zero for all of those products. Next slide. Oh, looks like I have a transition in there. Sorry about that, Jen. You can go ahead and click one more time. So the next market that I want to talk about is extruded products. We have injection molding, we have extrusion, we have compounding of TPEs, and all of these are growth opportunities for recycled rubber. But one of the primary issues we see today is that there are very few manufacturers that either have or want to invest in the equipment to do this type of work. It requires really tight specifications, extensive testing, it's highly technical in nature. Unlike compression molding, the cost benefit is also not the same. This market requires a much smaller, much more expensive particle size, and it competes with virgin rubber as well as competing with the plastics market. It's a fact that the tight tolerances on so many of these specifications just aren't easy for our industry to achieve. So in the Southeast, you've got Lehigh Technologies, which is a Georgia manufacturer, and they do supply into this market very effectively. But essentially, just to put it in perspective, where Liberty's granulation capabilities end is what's called a 30 mesh, which is, if you look at the end of your ballpoint pen, it's about the size of that small ballpoint. That is where their products actually start. They don't make anything bigger than that. And their product goes down to a size that is finer than talc. And that is because of these type of applications that it needs to go back into. And one that's not mentioned here, but is obvious and growing more and more, is back into new tire production. So while we know that rubber can't necessarily run as hot or as fast as plastic, it does have its place in these manufacturing processes for some applications. Go ahead, Jen. So where we see the greatest potential, one more click, where we see the greatest potential for recycled rubber is in the rubberized asphalt market. Generally, due to increases in state and local funding for road infrastructure process and some favorable policy that we've seen, there is really widespread optimism that paving volumes in general and the use of rubber in asphalt applications is going to steadily increase and remain strong over the next couple of years. One of the comments that was made earlier is there can be challenges with equipment, and I'm happy to say that that is something that now, with the evolution of the dry mix processes, is something that has been able to be addressed, right? So no longer do you have this need with a dry process application of all the specialized equipment and mobilizing different units. That is something that, you know, that rubber can be added in a wrap collar and off they go. Nothing special needed. So why haven't we seen growth more quickly in this area? You know, the DOTs are simply slow to adapt and they don't like change. The specifications that are being used by many of the transportation departments don't account for rubber and sometimes don't even apply to rubber additives. So it's really difficult to meet those specs without any opportunity until they're changed. So there are some moves towards things like balanced mix designs where you're looking at the actual end product versus the components that go into the mix. But that progression also takes years. Testing products takes years. You know, you may develop a product for this market or be able to put rubber in a product, and then it gets watched for 2, 3, 4 years before any agency will be comfortable continuing to move forward on that. So we've fortunately got a lot of test products that are out all over the country with rubber, and we hope to see that growing. There are numerous logistical and market and economic issues here. You know, the economics for this are good. They're not stellar. We compete with the binder market, and with the price of oil, this one's going to change. So until the polymer pricing changes, it's a really challenging market for us to try and get into. And as we know, oil and gas companies are kind of driving and oftentimes own those polymer businesses, which again just presents an inherent challenge to this market. That said, we know that asphalt could pretty much take care of almost every recycled tire that we see in the US on an annual basis if it were to be widely adopted. Next slide. So just a quick touch on a couple of other uses of chrome rubber. While I'd love to see these and they're innovative, you know, other than roofing applications, most of these are very, very small volume. So unique, you know, we've got fillers, we've got coatant, we've got sealants. We're seeing it used in fiber reinforced concretes, which is fantastic, waterproofing applications, but overall, most of the time, these volumes are pretty low, and we really need some market development to kind of grow these markets into something that will generate more volume overall. Even when these projects are highly successful, we see them as one-off opportunities, and it's really difficult to get full market adoption on these, because those who tend to find ways, like in the roofing applications, to utilize chrome rubber, they tend to keep that as a trade secret. And so we haven't seen full market penetration there. One area that I haven't mentioned on this slide, but is an obvious potential growth opportunity in chrome rubber, probably larger size chip, would be the pyrolysis, gasification, and devulcanization areas. And I didn't address that with a specific slide because those are markets that we are seeing and we see hopeful over the next 4 to 5 years, but today just really aren't there. And that does present some challenges. We've got a lot of investment going into those markets. Fortunately, we've seen the tire manufacturers getting involved in that space, so we hope to see them growing in the future. But today, there is a promise of that taking significant volumes of rubber. We just don't have the applications today of that live and working well in very many instances to really say that that is a market today that we see huge growth in. Next slide. So on a really positive note, I think the last thing I'd like to say here is I do think we have an opportunity to focus on utilizing recycled rubber in infrastructure projects. As an industry, we really need to shift our attention to this, and especially given the federal activity around infrastructure, there are so many fantastic opportunities, as you can see here, for ground rubber applications. I think as an industry, we need to do a better job. Often this tends to get lost in the shuffle because we've got specific product pitches, individual sales opportunities, and we kind of silo each of these areas. But when we take a step back, we're probably doing ourselves a disservice to approach it that way. If we're really going to move the needle on recycled rubber products, we should be looking at this segment holistically and kind of presenting that broader, more unified message here. I do think that's an area where the state agencies can help, encouraging the use of recycled material, helping to educate the DOTs and the other state agencies on what's available in these arenas, because many times there's just a lack of awareness or understanding of the benefits. So I'll kind of end, we were asked to talk about some of the challenges, and many of them have been covered, but I want to address some challenges that we're seeing in the tire recycling industry as a whole. There is a huge push on increased cost. As you guys all know and have probably seen in other segments, right? There is a lack of driver availability that is continuing to be a significant challenge on us. It puts pressure on service. It puts pressure on driver expenses. We just saw a report the other day that some of these brokers are offering $20,000 sign-on bonuses just to get enough drivers. And we see that driver shortage continuing to get worse. The last estimate that we saw was by 2023, we will have a shortage nationwide of about 160,000 drivers. And that now may be up to over 188 and climbing. We've seen, I just saw a story in Massachusetts recently, right, where they had to mobilize the National Guard just to help get kids to school because of a bus driver shortage. So we're not immune to that, and we're seeing those same challenges. It was already talked about today, but these larger tire sizes, they're also making it less efficient for us to do pickups. They fill the trucks much sooner. So whereas we may have previously been able to get 1,250 tires in a trailer, we're seeing almost a 12% decrease in capacity, which again, just impacts cost. The end markets have been negatively impacted by these market dynamics, by regulatory requirements. And right now we're seeing changes, the freeze that we saw in Texas in February, while it may seem ancillary to this business, has really significantly impacted those markets that use urethane for compression molding. So when you look today, the cost of urethane is up almost 70%. Which really has a significant impact on these guys. And for folks that are looking to supply chain challenges, right? We've got, 66 now containers still, or container ships still on the coast of California. And we just can't get that stuff in and we can't get it moving. So all of that is having, margin erosion for end product. And, just overall, Bruce mentioned it too, but equipment costs, right? So parts and supplies have gotten more expensive. I think oftentimes in our market, when people look at getting into tire recycling, it seems easy out of the gates, but a big piece that tends to get missed and is huge is maintenance expense, right? Constantly making sure you keep this equipment safe and maintained to produce proper efficiency. So I will end there because I know we're at the end of our hour and turn it back over to you, Will.
Thank you, Amy. That certainly is a lot of information. We are at the end of our time. We do have a few questions, but what we're going to do is I'm going to ask the panelists to give us just a short summary or closing comments. And for the questions, we will research those and publish those with the recording on our website. But I would, Jana and others, if you would just have a brief closing statement of what you see down the road in your program for tire management.
Oh, I get to go first on that one. That's a tough one. Yes, we are hopeful that there's new technologies coming that are going to improve markets, and I do think I'll echo what Amy said. I think the fact that the manufacturers are working with the processors, are working with state governments, or working with the equipment manufacturers. I think the fact that people are talking and working together is a positive, and I think we're going to continue to see more of that, because I think that's what it's going to take, and I think everybody recognizes that.
Thank you, Jana. Lena?
Sure. I'll say that we're working really hard in the state to encourage more of our local governments to participate in our scrap tire abatement reimbursement program, and hopefully, we'll see less and less dumps in the woods and get more tires to the processors.
Thank you, Lena. Bruce?
Yeah, I guess from the equipment standpoint, I would say that people should be looking to the manufacturers to address some of the concerns and things that you heard today, like what Amy was just referring to, especially with transportation. I know at EcoGreen in 2022 and 2023, you're going to see some new equipment come from us and I suspect from other manufacturers as well, that will help to eliminate some of the transportation issues. Be able to reduce the tires to a smaller chip size at the retailer level, or even at the for the tire manufacturers. And I think that will help a lot with some of the freight issues that Amy was talking about. For EcoGreen, you can go to YouTube. We have a YouTube page. You'll see a lot of the new equipment. And again, I would look at not just at our company, but at all the manufacturers, because they're all aware of this transportation issue. And basically when you're hauling a trailer full of tires, you're only half full. So in terms of weight, so that's a big challenge for us that we plan to address over the next 2 years.
Thank you, Bruce. And Amy, a closing remark?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for the time today, and for listening to all of us. If you have any questions, please reach out to any one of us, I'm sure. As far as Liberty Tire, if you've got ideas, you have opportunities for collaboration, you're interested in learning more about any of the products that that we are either manufacturing or working to process, please give us a call at any time, and we'd be happy to collaborate. We'd be happy to help out. We're here as a resource.
Thank you very much. I thank all of our speakers and our audience. I certainly do appreciate your being with us. Put it on your calendar for November 1st and November 30th and December 1st. We will have our annual meeting. That curriculum is coming together now, and it will be a virtual meeting like this, but there will be some opportunity for interaction there. We hope to see you then, and between now and then, I bid you the best. Thank you for joining us.